All right, so in this video, I'm gonna show you the last step of the last hand building project, which is gonna be this slump bowl that I made. You can see that it has shrunk a little bit, and then the other thing that's good is that it has dried enough where it will lift out easily. Now when I lift it out, you'll notice that it doesn't warp or bend. It's important that you get the timing right on this. It's good that you're actually at home because you can check it every couple hours. You can wrap it up if you can't check it for a few hours. I would guess it would probably take overnight, but it just depends on how thick the slab is. It also depends the temperature in your house, or if there's sunlight, or if the windows are open. So I can't really give you a hard time. But you can see I can take mine out of the mold. You can see that it's still leather hard on the outside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over onto my banding wheel. If you don't have a banding wheel, you can do a little bit of math to figure out where the center is, but basically I just want to know where the center of this is, like a circle, so I can put a foot on it. So I'm going to take any tool that will draw a line. And I'm going to get this thing in the center of the wheel. Looks like it's pretty close to the center. And then I'm just going to draw a little circle with my tool. It could be a pin tool or whatever. I just have this tool here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scratch along that edge. Mine is on a little bit on the dry side. It could be a little bit wetter, but it's okay if I use some slip to attach it. So I'm going to scratch here along that line that I made. You'll notice when I'm scratching it that it makes those little crumbs there. I want to leave those there. It'll help actually join the pot, because those little things will hydrate really quickly and turn into kind of like their own slip. So now I've scratched that area. And my slip will be a little bit darker just because I've been using some clay at school that's brown clay. So this is the color slip that I just have close to hand. I'm just kind of dabbing it down. I don't want it to run down the pot. I just want to put a little bit of water from my sponge with some wet clay. If you just use water, that's okay, but then it's really important that you go back and you scratch through it again once you have the water on there, because we need to make a really sticky surface. Now, you could make the foot smaller. You'll notice that the diameter of this circle, or the radius of this circle, is about the same as the width I left from the rim. That's just, it'll make it less likely to warp. You don't want to put a really small foot or a really wide one. I'm going to be using a coil from the coil pots to make my foot. All right, so I've got my coil. What I did was I rolled the coil and then I just kind of pounded it on the table flat with my hand so that I have kind of like a flattened coil. And I'm going to set it along my edge here. And it looks like I have it just enough. You can see I'm overlapping it on one side. I want to do that so that I can cut at a little bit of an angle where they're going to attach. And if I cut them together like this, and then when I pull it away, you'll see that these two pieces will fit together really nicely. I'm going to take this off separately, and I'm going to attach these together. I'm going to scratch it before I attach it. Let's move my bowl for a minute. I want to make sure this is nice and round, so I'm going to attach it and I'm going to try to get it as round as I can. See, I'm scratching it. A little bit of slip. Scratch the other side. This is a little wetter, so I don't have to be as careful with my scratching and my slipping, because this clay is obviously softer. So I blended those together on the inside and on the outside. And now I have a foot ring. Now, because I have a banding wheel, it has little concentric circles on it. I can kind of bend and adjust this ring to try to make it as round as I can. Or you can just find a circle and try to make it close to that circle, or just use your best guess. I'm also going to just lightly scratch the top of this. This will be the part that attaches. If your banding wheel is wet, like mine is, this little ring might stick to it a little bit, so just be careful. You might put a piece of paper down first. Same thing here. I'm just going to dab a little bit of slip. There we go. I'm going to set my bowl down. Now the good thing is, because I let that set for a second, that's going to be a little muddier. Because mine's dry, I'm going to go around it one more time with a little bit of slip, and then I'm going to scratch it one more time as well, just to make sure that I'll get a really good strong connection. If I don't scratch enough and I don't get enough slip here, it's really easy for it to crack as it shrinks. Okay. There we go. Now I'm going to take my ring, set my ring on top. Now if I didn't like how tall this was, I could have cut this thing down, made it shorter. I could still spin this and draw with my needle tool and try to cut it across, but I think it'll be okay with a tall foot. You could just roll your own coil. You can see I'm just going around it and kind of pushing down first because I want to make sure it's well attached. Here we go. I want to make sure it's as round as I can get it as well. This is the time to give it a little bit of movement if you can. There we go. Now if you have a banding wheel, one of the best things you can do is kind of spin it and take your sponge, and as you spin it, just kind of drag the sponge around the edge and the inside and the outside, and that'll clean up pretty quickly any of those little extra scratch marks. I like to use the back of my fingernail to kind of seal that seam. So I'm going to take in the back of my fingernail and you're going to collect some slip on it just to seal that down on the inside and the outside. I can wrap my sponge around it and kind of squeeze. Now if it doesn't sit perfectly level, that's when we can flip it over, we can make it more level. Now, after I put the ring on, what I can choose to do is I don't have to leave it a ring. I can cut sections out of this and I can have a foot that maybe isn't just a ring. So just as an idea of some things you can try, this will make it a little bit more fragile as it gets dry, but I'm gonna take and cut a section here. I'm gonna pull my tool out, and you could measure this and do a little bit of math to make sure you get it just right. I'm gonna eyeball it. I'm gonna cut out 3 little sections here, and I'm gonna see if I can get them as close to similar as possible. I'm sure it won't be perfect. You could use your pin tool obviously for this. I just happen to have a wire tool here, or a wood knife, or a metal rib rather, sorry. Okay, now because I just attached it, I probably can just peel these back because they just got attached. They haven't had a chance to set up yet. Just peeling it back. And now this way, I have a little different kind of foot. I can go in this middle area here, carefully smooth out any scratch marks that were there. And now I'm going to go back and kind of push this down. By cutting it and lifting it out, it might have gotten pressed down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here on each of these seams and I'm going to run my finger around it. Push down, run my finger around it. Just to make sure that it doesn't start lifting up from any of these corners. So I'm kind of just sealing this corner down. Now, once this dries leather hard, you want to go back and clean up all the edges. I can't clean up my foot today. I probably won't do that in the video. But what you will need to do is you will need to clean up your the outer edge. You probably will have a sharp edge on this edge here. I don't know if the video will catch this. Let's see, I'll bring it up close. You can see I have a really sharp edge right there. I want to bevel that edge down. So what I'm going to do is take my trimming tool, and as I spin my banding wheel, I can just, move my pot in a circle. I'm just going to kind of get rid of any sharp edge that is on the very rim of my bowl. And I want to do the same kind of cleanup procedure on the foot when I'm done with the foot. I'll go back in and make sure the foot looks nice and round still. Now that I have the bowl set up, I can go ahead and kind of give it a gentle push down. Again, if you have, it will stick to the wheel. If you put this paper there, it won't stick as much. I can kind of push down on it, and that's going to level it out because that clay is soft. Now, I wouldn't normally use my dirty fingers like I am now. These little spots won't show up as much. The black is much stronger. I'm not going to carve a design in this pot. If you need advice on how to carve or techniques for carving, you don't want someone carve, you can type in, carving clay through slip, whatever, into YouTube. You could watch my Greek pot video where my wife does the carving. What I'd like you to do with your carving on this final project is I want you to carve away at least 50% of the black, so it's like half black, half white, somewhere close. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see you just like do stripes. That doesn't mean you can't do a repetitive pattern, but I want the pattern to be somewhat complicated. You could, if you have a banding wheel, you could spin it and you could, do a spiral, and then you could do little designs in the spiral. You could carve the rim with little marks like this. You can see I'm just carving through like that. And you could alternate a pattern. If you wanted, you could take like this round part of the tool and you could just draw some wavy lines like this. If you don't push deep enough, you won't get all the way through the slip if you put it on. I put 2 coats on. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to carve some wavy lines, and this is just a freehand carving. You could draw a picture if you want. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. And now that I have this pattern here, maybe I can think, okay, now what could I do to add more to it? What if I went into the center of each of these wide points and I pulled another point off that point? And it could just start like a doodle does on a piece of paper. And then from here, I can continue that carving process. I can say, okay, now what if from the other side, I did a curve like this? It doesn't need to be exactly the same, obviously. And eventually, because I'm not measuring anything out, my pattern is going to stop looking like a pattern. It might just start looking like some decorative lines. Now, at this point, I have a bunch of shapes inside here. And with these individual shapes, I could start decorating in between each of these shapes and making each of these shapes different. And very quickly, you'll notice that you'll take away a good amount of the black. So I could go and on this one, and carve around the outside of the shape, little notches. You should spend a little more time than I am, but I'm showing you just a way you could start any kind of pattern. If you want to draw a picture, that's fine. If you want to draw a landscape, that would be fine. If you wanted to just do like a geometric pattern, like a Zentangle, that would be fine as well. But I can go through each of these and I could say, okay, on this one, maybe I'll do lines like this. Now, I'm also using just my loop tool. You could use your pin tool to get much finer lines. that. One of them I could take out maybe really large areas and it would make it look like the black is the pattern. You don't want to do this, like I said, when your slip is too wet. You want it to be where it is like mine, where you can blow on it or take a dry brush and brush the crumbs out. So I'm just doing random patterns. You feel free to make it as repetitive or as uniform as you want. I'm just showing you some ideas. I've got a smaller little metal tip here that will do a much more interesting pattern, or a much thinner, straighter pattern. Easier to carve with. So now you can see that my pattern already is interesting in that it is unique on all sides, but maybe it would look better if I did this repetitive pattern in each of these random shapes. Maybe this is too random. Now, the last thing that you can do is you can take the little squirt bottles that are in the cabinet if you want. And I've got a little squirt bottle here, and this has white slip in it. And you could draw a pattern. You could go back into these lines, and I could go back in here maybe, and this will shrink down. There we go. If you mess up like I did here, you could just really quickly pull that slip away and do it again. Right? You could draw with this slip over the black. I can go into this shape and maybe I'm standing up, so I don't have a really steady hand. But if you have a steadier hand than me, or you're a little more balanced than I am, you could make some lines that do something like that. I could do a vertical line. The trick with using the squeeze bottle is that you have to squeeze and move at the same time. If you don't like it, you can always just wipe it away. Any shapes would be fine, but you can go in with one of these squeeze bottles, fill it with some of the slip that you took with you, and go ahead and squeeze out different patterns and shapes. When you're done with this, you want to make sure that after it dries that you're very careful and that you clean up all the edges everywhere, that there's no sharp edges. If you do use the slip from the squirt bottle, as it dries, it will stay a little bit raised. Little dots like this are easy to knock off. They'll be fine when they're fired, but when they're bone dry, if you stack something in it or you bump up against it, you'll chip those guys right off, and it won't stick if it's bone dry. So that is the idea. I would probably finish some carving around the border or do something like that. If you carve something and you don't like it, if you carve it really deep, it'd be hard to get rid of. But if it's not too deep, you could go back in with the black slip and put a little black slip. This black slip is actually the same kind of clay that you're using. It's the recycled clay. I took all the sand and like groggy bits out of it, and then I added the black to it. So you should be able to just put it back in there like that, let it dry, smooth it out, and you won't be able to tell as much. Okay. All right, get these done. This should be the last hand building project.